We're still trying to figure out the mess that is the ACC Coastal, but the Tar Heels are undefeated and they've got a big chance to build on that lead Saturday night when they host Pitt.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Thursday, October 27th, 2022. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and you hear the throat problems going on. I apologize, everyone. Thank you for bearing with me. And I want to thank you for making Locked On Tar Heels your first listen or your first watch every single day. Please don't forget that the show is free and available anywhere you get podcasts, and you can subscribe right now to make sure you don't miss a second of your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online, which has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. It is a Locked On crossover here with Nick Fairbaugh from Locked On Pitt. I am Isaac Shade from Locked On Tar Heels ahead of this big ACC Coastal matchup coming up on Saturday night on the ACC Network. And Nick, let's start here. This is a story of two teams with quarterbacks seemingly headed in different directions in Pitt's Kenan Slovis and Carolina's Drake Maye. What say you to that, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, that's the story, right? Drake Maye looks like maybe you can argue the best quarterback in the ACC this year. He looks phenomenal. I mean, and he's done so well with Phil Longo's offense, who I think is a really underrated offensive coordinator.
Agreed.
It's been, and it's not just been the Josh Downs show either this year. That was kind of the story of last year, as like, who's can step up other than Josh Downs, but there's been some guys stepping up on Carolina's weapons groups. Antoine Greene has been decent enough this year for Carolina, so you have to kind of respect those guys. Right. And I think what it's done is it's really kind of opened up so much for Drake Maye, both as a runner, because he's another tough runner. He's very like Sam Howell-ish to me as a runner. You know how Sam Howell was super tough and was like a bowling ball and tough to bring down and all that. Drake Maye has a lot of those qualities too.
Just with really more height.
Yeah, man. He's just a tough player. Like you look at him and you can't help but be impressed. Drake Maye's got a great deep ball. He's got really good football smarts already. He's looking really, really good and kind of everything that you want in a passer right now. Drake Maye is. He takes care of the football. He only has thrown 3 picks. That's 24 touchdowns. Like that is really, really what you want. And he's been able to elevate this offense past what it would be. So I think Drake Maye's been awesome this year. And I think that's been one of the really fun things to watch in the ACC has been what he's been able to do with his receivers. And so, you have a good group now where you have, J.J. Jones producing, you have Bryson Nesbit, you have Kamari Morales. I mean, you have all these guys that are getting over 200 yards thus far this year. So you're spreading around the rock a little bit, and there's Josh Downs, who you have to worry about the most, obviously being that guy. But you got Greene as kind of your explosive threat, who's averaging almost 30 yards per carry, per catch, which is insane. Like, I mean, literally, that is an insane stat. He has 13 receptions for 384 yards. I mean, absurd stuff from Antoine Greene right now.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what it is. And Drake Maye's just taking full advantage of the weapons he's been given. And I think you have to really acknowledge that. But Kenan Slovis is kind of the story here. It's like, just as good as Drake Maye's been, Kenan Slovis has been disappointing, right? Kenan Slovis is one of those guys who, coming into the year, honestly, like, we look at it and we say, man, he could be one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC. Look
Absolutely.
What he did at USC, right? Like,
absolutely.
He was the freshman of the year in 2019. He was a first-team All-Pac-12 selection in 2020. In 2021, he dealt with a lot of injuries. Jackson Dart came in, played really well. And so you thought, okay, maybe it was just injuries at that point, and Dart was the young guy who's playing really well. So Slovis is going to go to greener pastures, and everything's going to work out, but it hasn't done that, really. He did a really good job at the end of the West Virginia game to lead him to a win, and then the first half against Tennessee. And that was when it looked like, okay, this is Kenan Slovis. He's here. Kenan Slovis is back. That's what everyone thought. And then he got concussed. And he missed a game against Western Michigan, came back, and he really hasn't looked the same. He looks skittish. He looks a little bit kind of off the radar right now. He's just not seeing defense as well, passing up easy reads and trying to be he's super passive, and then when he gets aggressive, he's missing obvious reads. You go to the first interception against Louisville, it was a play action rollout pass where he had his guy wide open in the flat and decided to push into double coverage, and it was a pick. And I mean, that's inside the 20-yard line. That's a red zone opportunity that they just burst. That's been the one thing with Kenan Slovis. Hasn't been that, okay, he's just killing drives. No, they're driving, and he's killing them with turnovers. That's been the thing with Kenan Slovis. He is killing them because he's turning the football over at a really, really high rate. And so Slovis has to get that together, man. He looks skittish in the pocket, doesn't look confident in his reads. He has the arm still, and from time to time, you'll see him just uncork an absolute unreal throw, and he'll do it once or twice a game, and he can do it more. He did it against Tennessee and in that second half against West Virginia a lot, and he's mobile enough too to make plays, but he doesn't really use it because, again, he looks timid. He's just a guy that isn't playing well. He's not seeing the ball well, not reading coverage as well. He looks like he's scared to play the game of football right now, and that's the thing. I mean, he has 5 interceptions in the past 3 weeks, which is just not acceptable enough. And so, he did have 3 touchdowns against Georgia Tech, but 2 of those were really in garbage time. So, I mean, he's really been really bad, and he's been hurting this team a lot. And so, I don't know. Pitt's not asking Kenan Slovis to be Kenny Pickett, and obviously that's the big thing. But listen, he's just had to not be awful, and he really has been recently. And I think that's been the key here with Kenan Slovis. He's really dragged Pitt down with his play. It just has not been up to standard. So who knows? Maybe they look for another quarterback here in Nick Petty or Nate Urnell. We'll see if that happens. But if he struggles again, it would not surprise me. But Isaac, there's weapons here to worry about on both Pitt and North Carolina. I talked about Josh Downs a little bit. You could talk about Josh Downs too, but also Pitt. The reason they are 4-3 right now in a lot of ways is their fantastic running back. It's Israel Abanikanda.
This dude, insane. Yes. Yeah, and so with some of Carolina's weapons, I think everyone knows Josh Downs, and we'll talk about. I know Nick's going to talk about the matchup there with what we think are 2 NFL guys going at each other in when Carolina has the ball, and so that's going to be fun. Nick will talk about that in a little bit. And so, since we all know about him, let me add on to a couple other guys just for the Pitt crew to be watching out for. You spoke about Antoine Greene. He missed the first 3 games of the season with a collarbone injury suffered in the preseason, came back against Notre Dame, and has had multiple touchdowns of over 50 yards in that span. And so he has been, as you said, this incredible deep threat to help take some of the load off of what Josh Downs is doing in the slot or when he splits out. And so, man, that 1-2 punch has been really, really helpful and productive for Drake Maye. The other thing, and you referenced a couple of the tight ends, Carolina has 3 tight ends that any of whom can be strong pass catching tight ends. It's Kamari Morales that starts, but another player who you mentioned, Bryson Nesbit, is actually the more probably versatile and NFL ready of the tight ends. He often splits out wide and has some other things of that nature. And so Drake Maye is looking for him as an athletic, almost wide receiver, tight end hybrid kind of player. Interesting dichotomy for the Tar Heels versus Pitt is while you got everything you need out of the backfield with Izzy, the Tar Heels are really trying to find who is going to be their running back. When you look at the ACC running back standings right now, I had it pulled up a minute ago. I must have taken it away. You've got Abanikanda at what, like 959 yards, easily far and away the highest player in the ACC. And you scroll down, number 10 in the ACC is Carolina's leading rusher, a guy named Drake Maye. And so Carolina doesn't even have a running back leading their team in rushing yards right now. And that is a bit of an issue. In fact, at times, the most productive running back has been true freshman Omarion Hampton, who wasn't even an early enrollee. He didn't come till this summer and has started several games. So you're looking for this running back rotation of Omarion Hampton, Caleb Hood, and then we've started to see an afterthought, a guy named Elijah Greene mix in a little bit. So that's something to watch out that Pitt might be able to exploit there in the running game. Talk to us more about Izzy. Let's hear it, Nick.
Yeah, and special speed. I mean, that's the big thing with Izzy. You talk about Antoine Greene being a home run hitter from, wide receiver position. Just go to the Virginia Tech game, and you'll see what a home run hitter Israel Abanikanda is. And it's not just against Western Michigan or Rhode Island where he has great games. He did. 320 yards against Virginia Tech, another great game. Look at what he did against Tennessee. Tennessee has shut down just about every running back they have faced this year. They didn't shut down Izzy. Izzy broke off a 79-yard touchdown very early in that game. He's got special track speed. Once he gets in the open field and he gets a crease, you're not catching him. You have to have crazy athletes to catch Israel Abanikanda. He is a real all-around back, too. So he's a 3-down back. He's a pretty good pass protector. He's really grown into that role. He's got soft hands, so he'll come out of the backfield and make that happen. Screen plays. Man, he had a dynamic screen pass catch against Louisville where he took a 39 yards and broke 4 or 5 tackles on the way doing it.
That was special.
And man, listen, if Slovis, I'll tell you what, it was in the fourth quarter when it was still 14-10, and Slovis threw the ball behind Izzy. If he puts it out in front of him, he's gone. He would have been an 80-yard touchdown. And that's the special type of speed you have in Izzy. And the thing I'll say about this is, it's not just a one-man backfield. It has been this year, but that's only because Rodney Hammond's been hurt. And Rodney Hammond is the number 2 on this Pitt team. The one game where you look at Israel Abanikanda's production where he really didn't do anything was against West Virginia. Hammond was the guy that did. He's more of a hard tooth and nail type of runner that just comes and bangs you. And he's a smaller dude, though. He's a 5'8", maybe 210 guy, hard runner, really quick, really decisive. Pitt pulled out a wildcat formation last week where Hammond was the quarterback and Abanikanda was the running back. So I would expect that to be a thing where you have to defend that, especially when you look at North Carolina's run defense. Just not very impressive right now. So I would imagine that's the kind of what they're doing right now with the lack of confidence in Kenan Slovis. Use your running backs, and Hammond's a really good one too. And Izzy obviously is so great just because he's got the vision, got the speed. He is not a super quick player, I wouldn't say. I think he's a little kind of stiff laterally, but he doesn't really need to use his lateral ability because he's just so fast and he's big enough. Like he was a state winning track star in New York City.
Wow.
So I mean, he is a truly special speed athlete. So that is going to be the biggest thing. Trying to shut him down, it's really just shooting the gaps. You got to get him before he can get to the line of scrimmage and more, because he will also run forward and run tough. He's 5'11", 220, all of it, and has a very thick lower body. So he'll keep going, man. And that's been the really kind of impressive thing about Izzy is just he's a very good all-around full running back that has a really good fullback too in Daniel Carter that leads the way for him. So yeah, Pitt's a pro-style offense. They're a bit of a different style than probably you'll ever see again this year, but they do it because Israel Abanikanda is so good at what he does.
Absolutely. And what we want to do, folks, is unpack some of those key matchups. How will the Tar Heels work at trying to stop Abanikanda? How will Pitt work at trying to slow down Drake Maye and Josh Downs and company? We're going to unpack that in just a second after I tell you about Sweat Block. Man, Pamela would hide in the office bathroom every 30 minutes or so to dry off her armpits so no one would see the wet circles forming under her arms. Well, thanks to Sweat Block, she's finally got her life back. Why? Because she was able to fix her problem with Sweat Block, which gives you the confidence to wear what you want without embarrassing underarm sweat or body odor. In fact, the Sweat Block wipes were recently featured and tested on the Rachel Ray Show by firefighters, and it worked for them. If it works for them in that environment, it works anywhere, including the frigid cold of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You don't even need it there, but whatever. So, folks, if you or someone you love is experiencing embarrassing sweat or odor, try Sweat Block. Save 20% with promo code LOCKEDON at sweatblock.com. It's also available on Amazon. All right, so Nick, let's unpack some of these matchups that we think are going to be key to this game. Let's start by you talking about how this matchup we referenced earlier when Josh Downs is in the slot looking to make money happen.
Yeah, this is the big question. Josh Downs lines up a lot in the slot, and that's been the one thing you look at Josh Downs that he really wins at. He wins down the field. He wins pretty much at all levels of the field, but he does it from the slot at a really, really high rate. And he's a really good football player. But Pitt also has one of the best free safeties and, quite honestly, one of the best defensive backs right now in the conference and maybe in the country in Eric Hallett. He is just having a true breakout season. We didn't really know what he was going to be this year. And then he kind of came out last year, had a very rocky year, finished it really strong, had that 2-pick game in the ACC championship game against Wake Forest that really kind of solidified it. And this year, he's just gone off. I mean, he's been targeted 30 times, has only allowed 9 receptions and less than 75 yards. That is the lowest PFF has charted of all defensive backs. That is the lowest amount of yards allowed in the slot this year. He has been extremely good. So Josh Downs, for a guy that has been so productive in the slot, I mean, you look at how many times he's played in the slot. He's played 228 times in the slot compared to only 83 times out wide. He's going to be your guy. This is mano y mano. This is going to be who can win. And for Eric Hallett, this is going to be a state in the game for how much he's come along. But I'll tell you another guy that they faced who played in the slot a lot. That was Jalen Hyatt at Tennessee. And Hyatt didn't do really anything against Eric Hallett. And they had to move him around to get him away. And that's been the big thing all year long. Eric Hallett has been so dependable. He's not the fastest, and I think that's where Downs can maybe get him up with down the field. He's not fast, but he's super smart. He's a really good tackler, and he's got ball skills for days. This guy is a certified ball hawk. When you watch Eric Hallett, man, he's just got a nose for that football. And I think that's one of my favorite things about Eric Hallett is his just sense of awareness for the football. And he has such a keen kind of eye for quarterbacks. He just understands what's going on and where he should be. I mean, he has 3 interceptions on the year. He has 7 pass deflections. This is a guy that gets targeted a lot at still, and teams go at him, and usually they're punished for it. And so Eric Hallett is the big one to watch here, but I would not be surprised if Josh Downs gets one up on him because I think Josh Downs is that good, quite frankly. So we'll see what ends up happening there. But Isaac, I want you to now talk about Izzy. We've talked about Izzy. We've talked about Hammond too. But if North Carolina wants to slow down this Pitt offense a little bit on the ground, you're looking at the Tar Heel linebackers here to maybe step up.
Yeah, I think that's a huge matchup in the one I'm watching for. You talked about earlier the Carolina run defense hasn't been all that productive. Let's just take the word run out of that. The Carolina defense hasn't been all that productive this year as a whole. And so I think one of the best ways to keep Josh Downs and Drake Maye off the field is just to control the clock and to control the ball using Izzy. Now, one of the things about Carolina, where they have worked to some success, is in the linebacking core. Gene Chizik's scheme is a 4-2-5, where you've just got 2 linebackers. One of the linemen is a jack position. It's kind of that D end outside linebacker hybrid, and that's Noah Taylor, who's a Virginia transfer. But your linebacking core is Cedric Gray and Power Echols, one of my favorite names in college football, Power Echols. And these 2 guys are the only defensive duo in all of FBS who both average at least 9.4 tackles a game. They're one of just two duos in all of Power 5 who combine for 20 tackles a game. And so you love to see what they're doing, but it's got to start up front with those 4 on the line. Carolina has had some issues getting into the backfield this year, whether it's in run or pass, to free things up. And I mean, the question is, are they getting all those tackles just because they're that incredible or because other people are not tackling well? And honestly, it's a little bit of both, Nick, if we're being honest about that. But with somebody like a Abanikanda, they're going to have so much lane discipline, have to get off of blocks and get into the backfield. As you said, if they get past the line and into that second level, bye-bye, see you later, Pitt's on the scoreboard. And so for Echols and Gray, that means getting up and into the backfield while not falling for any of that misdirection that might be happening, especially if they do go to some of those different matchups, trying to get Slovis maybe out of the way a little bit sometimes. And so if there is some of that wildcat, what is that going to mean for what Pitt is able to do offensively? And so this is going to be huge for me, is to watch the matchup of Carolina's linebacking core of Cedric Gray and Power Echols trying to slow down in some way. You can't stop him, but slow down Mr. Israel Abanikanda.
Yeah, and the Pitt offensive line is a solid unit. I wouldn't call it a great unit. It's a good run blocking unit. They lost Carter Warren, their left tackle, for the season due to torn meniscus, which is a loss, but Branson Taylor, his backup, has filled in nicely. So they run block well. That has been one of the big things in the times that Kedon Slovis has looked decent in the past few weeks has been when the run game really works. He hasn't looked great even when it's working, which is kind of an indictment on it, but he looks better, obviously, when teams have to get sucked up by play action and he can just toss it behind them. And that's when my X factor kind of pulls us all together. I think Gavin Bartholomew, the Pittsburgh tight end, is kind of the X factor in all of this. If Pitt can get the run game going, I think they can maybe hit some big plays behind the linebackers with him. And that's been one of the things they've done this year is they've gotten him involved at times. Against Tennessee, that's what happened. Izzy had the big run the next drive. They come out, and it's a big-time touchdown to Bartholomew where he hurdles a defender. So we'll see what ends up happening. But we're going to go into predictions. We're going to recap this all. We're going to bring it kind of all together. Maybe some stuff we haven't talked about yet. We'll bring it all together. But first, folks, I want to let you know for your second listen today, after you watch this Locked On crossover edition between North Carolina and Pitt, you need to check out Locked On Sports today, because from the games that matter to the most and biggest stories and athletes in the game, you can go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only the Locked On Now network can provide. Locked On Sports today, available on the app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts, folks. Make sure to check out Locked On Sports today. That's great stuff over there. They do great work.
Yes, absolutely.
And we're continuing to talk Pitt UNC here. Chapel Hill action at night, 8 o'clock, if you guys want to check that out. But Isaac, I want to talk about just give me some stuff we haven't mentioned yet. What's the key that maybe is lurking in the background that you could put money on right now and say, okay, this is maybe what you aren't talking about, but it could make a difference?
Yeah. There's two different ways I'm thinking to go with that. One of which you just talked about Pitt's offensive line. Carolina gets one of their offensive lineman starters back this week who had been out the past couple of weeks. And so you've got that unit back intact. They've not been perfect, but they've been solid, kind of what you said. There have been 2 games this season where Carolina hasn't allowed any sacks. And so if that offensive line can continue to grow and develop together under the leadership of center Corey Gaynor, who's a Miami transfer, then things can go really well. Now, as opposed to what you were saying about, we've talked about Kedon Slovis causing some of his own sacks. I think that's something that one of my critiques of Sam Howell often was that Sam Howell tried to do too much because he could usually, but would lead to him holding onto the ball too long. Drake Maye has not done that. And so I think I'm really curious to see what kind of time the offensive line can give Drake Maye, how he continues to progress. But the other thing I want to point out that a lot of people probably might not think about with the running game of Pitt is that Carolina's secondary has really struggled this season. You've got your starting cornerbacks in Tony Grimes and Storm Duck, another great name in college football. And I just want to see them continue to communicate and find cohesion in the defensive secondary. If not, Carolina could allow Kedon Slovis to have a Heisman type day.
Yeah, that would be obviously great for Pitt fans if Slovis in the passing game start to get clicking. Now, I'll say that I think this is something that we haven't seen Pitt do in a while, and Pitt hasn't really broken out in the passing game since Tennessee, since Slovis was last healthy. And if they can find some of that magic that they had in the second half against West Virginia and the first half against Tennessee, this Pitt team becomes a lot more dangerous. I'll say this about Pitt. Talented football team. Very flawed right now. Very, very, very flawed. Because of their quarterback. The receivers haven't played with a ton of consistency. And that's been another thing about the passing game. When Slovis has sometimes been on, the receivers aren't helping him. Pitt losing Jordan Addison is a big-time issue, and we have seen it all year long. Jaden Bradley, a young sophomore who was really productive, entered the transfer portal in midseason, so they don't have him anymore. They've been banged up We don't even know who's going to play for Pitt right now, wide receiver wise, because they're so banged up in that room. Now, Jared Wayne will play. He's their dependable wide receiver one, so he will be here. Kadade Mumfield will play. He's a transfer from Akron, who was a freshman All-American last year. He's been inconsistent thus far this year, but he's had flashes of wow. So if he can put it together, maybe they can get the breakout game they've been waiting for from Kadade Mumfield. But their three is Bub Means, who's a Louisiana Tech transfer, who's kind of their explosive downfield guy. He got hurt pregame last week. Didn't really play much. Gavin Thompson, his backup, then got hurt in the game. So it's Jalen Barton, who is a junior explosive player who really wins down the field, but is super inconsistent with drop issues and kind of that. And behind him, we haven't seen Miles Alston. We haven't seen Addison Copeland. We haven't seen Shane Nwobiko. Those last two, Copeland and Nwobiko, are freshmen. So the wide receiver room of Pitt is kind of the X factor I'm looking for here. With that, I also want to look at another thing on Pitt's defense in that the defense has played pretty well. Pitt's defense has been really solid thus far this year. And they're really, it's their issue on defense has been their linebackers. They haven't really found consistency in the linebacker room, and they've kind of been working around rotating guys into different spots, and feels like they finally found their starting three, which is Servasia Dennis, Shane Simon, who is a Notre Dame transfer, Tyler Wiltz, who's a Missouri State transfer, and Wiltz and Simon have kind of stepped in and played a really high level. And so it feels like they're starting to find kind of a groove there. But that was really last week where we saw them finally hit the groove. So the question is going to be, is this real or is it a one-game wonder? And then the defensive line for Pitt is kind of the other X factor I have to mention, because Kalijah Cansey's a really good player. Habakkuk Baldonado, you want to talk about great names in college football? Habakkuk Baldonado will qualify for that. But Pitt has a lot of vets just on that unit that have kind of been waiting to break out. Baldonado had his best game of the year against Louisville. Cansey has been a monster this year. He's pretty much been on all the All-American list thus far. Explosive defensive tackle in the middle. So I'm interested to see if Pitt can kind of break down that UNC defensive line and maybe get to Drake Maye. Drake Maye is going to get his, but I wonder if they can get to him one, two, three times, and maybe, maybe force a fumble and kind of flip the script on that. So I think that's going to be the big thing. Pitt's going to have to be in the plus turnover battle here. Keaton Slovis is going to have to take care of the football. But all right, Isaac, let's get to the big reveal time. Big time reveal time. You know what it is. It's prediction time. I'm going to throw it to you first.
Okay.
The home team, you get to, if you will, throw it out first. What do you think?
Yes. Well, it is the home team, and it is homecoming for North Carolina this weekend. Looking back quickly at this series, Pitt's won the last two. Carolina had won the 6 prior to that. The last 10 meetings are one possession games, Nick, all the way back to October of 98 to get a score of bigger than, or a game that had bigger than a 1-score margin. That is insane to me. And honestly, I don't expect any different in this one. Both these teams really, I know Carolina has the better record, but still trying to find their way, especially defensively. Looking at Bet Online, which is our betting sponsor here on Locked On Network, the game is Carolina -3 with an over-under of 65. And honestly, I'm going right down the middle with a push on that. I'm going to take Carolina 45, Pitt 42. I just feels like a high-scoring affair to me. And so obviously with that high scoring of a game, I am definitely going with the over. What about you, Nick?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I remember last year when it was Sam Howell versus Kenny Pickett, and everyone thought it was going to be a shootout. And it ended up being a sloppy game that ended up going to overtime and did not end up being a high-scoring game.
No.
And I'll tell you what.
It was raining, right? Wasn't it raining really bad?
It rained really bad at the end of the game.
Yeah.
The heavens just opened up
overtime started. That's right.
Yeah, the heavens just opened up on Sam Howell, and obviously Pitt ended up winning on that, and then Kenny Pickett ripped the ball through to Lucas Kroll and all of that. I remember that game very vividly.
Yeah.
But to me, Pitt right now is a really flawed team, and their quarterback can't be trusted. If their quarterback could be trusted, I could predict something like an upset. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe this is a game where they can completely get away with just riding Hammond and Abanikanda. I just don't think you can do that in the ACC, though. I think you have to have a multi-layered attack at some point. Yeah. Keaton Slovis at some point in this game is going to have to make the play. and he hasn't made the play in recent weeks. I don't know why I would trust him. I think, again, Pitt's defense is good. I think that they might force a turnover or two on defense. I think maybe Eric Hallett snatches one off Drake Maye, something like that. I could see it happening. Pitt is a really ball hawk kind of centric defense, and they have a good front, but it's inconsistent at the second level. They're still finding their footing. And so it's a defense that allows explosive plays too. I mean, they only play cover 0 quarters. That is what they do. That is a Pat Nurgy scheme. So Drake Maye, Antoine, Greene, Josh Downs, all those guys, they're going to get theirs. There's going to be points put up here. I actually probably boldly, I'm taking the under on the point total. I actually think this ends up being a little bit more of a slog. I think Pitt ends up controlling a bit of the time of possession in this one. I think that they will find success with Izzy and them. But I just don't trust Keaton Slovis to make the play when he needs to. I think UNC wins. I think it'll be close, but I'll take UNC 31, say 21. And maybe they get, an extra touchdown on a pick 6 or something like that from Keaton Slovis. I just can't trust Slovis right now to predict an upset.
Love it. Okay, you have heard our predictions. I'm over. Nick is under. I've got a higher score. Nick a lower. Carolina covering in Nick's and the push in mine. Going to be a fun time in Kenan Stadium Saturday night in Chapel Hill. Thank you so much for joining Nick Fairbaugh and myself, Isaac Shade, for this crossover edition of Locked On Tar Heels and Locked On Pitt. Well, that's it for today's episode of Locked On Tar Heels. My thanks to Nick Fairbaugh from Locked On Pitt for joining us for this crossover episode. Coming up tomorrow, we got a couple previews. North Carolina's men's basketball exhibition game is Friday night, and we're going to do a North Carolina specific preview of the Carolina Pitt game. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Heels, and you can follow me at Isaac Shade. Thank you for making Locked On Tar Heels your first listen. And for your next listen, make sure to check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reaction, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Thanks so much for spending part of your Thursday hanging out with me and Nick and talking about this matchup. And I want to remind you that it is always a great day to be a Tar Heel. Until tomorrow, peace.